Hi, my name is Anna Northcutt. I completed the National Bible Week Summer Study 9 times, and I've advanced to the National Competition 8. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Hebrew and Greek words in the Discovery Journal. Okay, let's go. From a quantitative perspective, Hebrew and Greek words, or as the Bible Bee is taken to calling it, original language, aren't that important. After all, they're only 10% on the test, but think about it from this angle.
Hebrew and Greek words, they're probably maybe 10% or less. But since there's only usually about 30 words, then that's doable to learn. It's worth working on. We're having 10 questions.
On the 2022 qualifying test, Thomas actually scored quite well. However, because of how tightly the top 120 scores were bunched, if he had scored just 10% less, he not only would have failed to qualify, but he also would have ranked 76 places lower than he did. Don't underestimate the power of 10%. Before we jump into how to study Hebrew and Greek words, I wanted to take just a second to talk about their definitions. Up until last year, I had always pretty studiously memorized the definitions for the Hebrew and Greek words in the Discovery Journal, so it kind of came as a shock to me when I learned that a lot of people totally skip the definitions and focus solely on the translations. In light of this discovery, you can bet your boots when I was interviewing Bible readers earlier this year about how they prepared for the qualifying test, I made sure to ask them, do you think the definitions for Hebrew and Greek words are important? And this is what they told me.
That's when practice tests and qualifying tests run together, because it's like, did this person ask it or was it on the actual test?
I've asked my kids a lot, and especially the primary kids, I don't think they have ever told me that they've been asked for the full definition on a test. And to me, the definition gives some context and some understanding, but really I just want to know the word means this. This is how I translate it. This is what it is in the text.
At juniors, I don't remember them asking specifically, and I was never at primary, so I guess I can't remember that. But I know on the seniors, since they're trying to make it hard, I think they did ask one or two. I know they do ask them, though.
Last year, I did do the definitions. I didn't memorize them word for word, but I was able to mostly recite them. The year before that, I did not memorize the definitions, and honestly, there was not a marked difference in how I saw that on the qualifying test.
I do make sure that I'm familiar enough with it, but just by reading over it, that I would be able to tell the difference between on the test. Unless it's a word that it's the same English word but different Hebrew, then I do memorize the differences, because I find that it's something that they very frequently test on, is which of the definitions goes with which of the Hebrew words.
I do really appreciate what one Bible reader I talked to said, that is, if I know what a Hebrew word means, as in knowing its definition, it's really easy for me to recognize that word because I've formed a mental connection with it and I'm using that word to help me interpret the passage. If it's just a random word and I just memorized it, it doesn't really have that much meaning to me. But if I make it meaningful by interpreting the passage using that word, then it will be much easier to memorize. I've never looked at Hebrew and Greek word definitions that way, but I know it definitely applies to some cross-references, say Mark 5:28-30. For that cross-reference, it's way easier for me to remember it as, this is the passage where the woman with the issue of blood touched Jesus' garment, and Jesus felt dunamis go out of him, rather than just trying to remember it by dunamis. This is a dunamis passage. Don't forget that, brain. Dunamis. Got it? So,
if you have extra time, which no one ever does, but if you do,
give Hebrew and Greek words some love. Okay, that was a very long second I just took to talk about that, but hopefully it was somewhat helpful. Now, how do you actually study Hebrew and Greek words?
For Hebrew and Greek words, I just write them down on index cards.
I used them, I think, until I ran out, and that was a few years ago. And I didn't. My dad never ordered anymore, so I just wrote it in my notebook and just put two columns. One it was the Hebrew, and one was the English.
I've put in a Quizlet.
Context. I kept asking Elia, how do you study this? Or how do you study that? And she kept saying,
Quizlet, 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 Quizlet.
So by the time we reached Hebrew and Greek words, Quizlet had never been funnier. In all seriousness, though, the 3 responses I just included mostly encapsulate all the answers I received. Just write it out, type it out, and review it over and over until you remember it. One thing that will make your life loads easier when it comes to remembering Hebrew and Greek words, however, is mnemonics.
Another thing I would do is try to think of like English words that kind of reminded me of it. Like, for example, I know one of the words we had, this might have been a couple years ago, was like pot sack, and it kind of sounded like potato sack to me, and it meant burst open. So kind of like picture a sack of potatoes bursting open, and things like that have helped me a lot if it's a word that for whatever reason I cannot get in my head.
Probably the most epic and definitely the most extensive example of Hebrew and Greek word mnemonics I've ever seen was Kezia Ballards' list from 2022. You see, Titus Alexander had compiled this huge list of Hebrew words from Isaiah 40 through 48 for the National Bible Bee competition that year, and then he'd shared it on the National Bible Bee social community. Kezia took his list, wrote out mnemonics for a bunch of the words, and then she shared it on the National Bible Bee social community too, and invited other people to contribute their own mnemonics. It was such a cool way to bless others. Titus, thank you so much for compiling that list, and Kezia, thank you for making it marginally less intimidating to learn. Well, that's pretty much all I had to say about Hebrew and Greek words, but before we end the video, I just wanted to share an encouraging word from the one and only Jordan Tabor.
Press on. Qualifying is a very worthy goal. Nationals is awesome. So